Welcome to Pure Nonfiction, the podcast interviewing documentary filmmakers that reminds you to watch what you tweet. I'm your host, Tom Powers. In this episode, we interview Josh Kriegman and Elise Steinberg, the directors of Weiner, about the politician Anthony Weiner as he crisis manages a sexting scandal while running to be mayor of New York City in 2013. Weiner won the Grand Jury Prize at the Sundance Film Festival and sparked new tabloid headlines. In this clip from the film, Anthony Weiner is riding in the front seat of the car while Josh is filming from the back seat and asks a question.
Has anyone ever told you it's hard to get you to talk about your feelings?
Let me ask you something. There must be some species of fly that stays on the wall and talks, but I've never heard of one. Usually, is the fly on the wall technique, doesn't that have to do a little bit with the notion of not being seen or heard? You just kind of pick up what goes on around you?
We recorded this conversation during the Montclair Film Festival in my New Jersey basement. Josh, my understanding is the seed of this film is that you used to work for Anthony Weiner. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so I actually met Anthony while working for him in politics. I was his chief of staff for a couple of years when he was in Congress. So I got to know him well through that work and got a real sense of what a dynamic and interesting person he is. And then I left politics and started working in filmmaking with Elise. And Anthony and I stayed in touch over the years. And then when he got caught up in the sexting scandal that ultimately led to his resignation after that.
You weren't working for him at that point?
No, I had left him years before then. So I was already in filmmaking, sort of watching that unfold. And then after he resigned, Elise and I knew that his story would be a pretty amazing one to tell if he would be willing to let us tell it. And so I started a conversation with him about that, about the possibility of making a documentary, what that would look like, what he would be comfortable with. And we really sort of had this back and forth about that for a couple of years. And then when he announced he was running for mayor, actually the morning that he announced he was running, he actually texted me early that morning and said, "I'm running for mayor. I'm actually with my staff in my apartment. Do you want to come with a camera?" To which I, of course, replied yes. And I think literally ran over, texted Elise on the way, and just started shooting. And we really ended up shooting from, as you see in the film, the day he announced he was running all the way through to the end of the election.
So I should clarify, you guys are a filmmaking team. You're not a partnership team. You each have different life partners. Elise, how did you join forces with Josh in filmmaking?
So I had been making documentaries for many years. I had made films for PBS and A&E. And Josh had been working in politics, but we started talking about filmmaking, and we both shared a passion for making character-driven verite docs. And so we teamed up, and we've been working together for about 5 years on various nonfiction film and television projects. And we were looking for a dynamic, fascinating character to follow. So when this opportunity came along to film with Anthony, we knew it was something we just couldn't pass up.
So you start off with Anthony at the beginning of his race for mayor, having no idea about what's to come. But he was a candidate who already had one sexting scandal behind him that had forced him to resign from Congress. What was your perspective on him as a politician?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously had worked for him and gotten to know him well in the political arena, and there was a lot that I, as a politician, there was a lot that I admired about him. I mean, he was prior to his scandal, he was a rising star in the Democratic Party, and for a lot of progressives, he was really one of the most forceful voices for progressive causes like single-payer healthcare and things like that. And so he was a dynamic, force in politics. I think prior to his resignation, that's something that I had gotten to know working for him.
What was the conversation amongst his staff or other people you knew who worked for him? I mean, did they think that him running for mayor was a good idea, or did they think that there could be another crisis in the making?
I mean, I think everyone obviously understood the context for the race. Of course, he was only a couple years out from this fairly unprecedented sexting scandal. And so, no one really had any idea how it was going to unfold or what was going to happen. But of course, he and his staff were animated by, what he was trying to do as a mayoral candidate. And really, I think, hopeful that New Yorkers would be able to, look past his scandal and consider him again as a politician, for sure.
So, Elise, Josh comes in with this connection to Anthony. In the course of the film, we sometimes hear Josh's voice behind the camera. What were you doing in the filmmaking process?
Yeah. So, Josh and I, this is a co-directing team, and very early on, I think the first day of shooting, Josh went, and we had another camera person by the name of Sean McGing, someone I had worked with before, and it became clear that we really just needed to have one person in the room, and that person should be Josh. So Josh was shooting, and we were talking throughout the filming. And at certain stages, I would go with another camera person, maybe two, to events to film exteriors or other events or follow their candidates. I think on election night, you see I was with the camera crew outside McDonald's when things...
Yeah, I want to talk about that in a bit.
Yeah. But Josh and I were talking throughout, and I think one of the things is that I didn't know Anthony prior to working on this film, and I think I was able to serve sort of as the audience member and having that distance about wanting to ask questions about, who is he, and, thinking about story from a distant perspective. And I think that, like audience members and a lot of people, I had preconceived notions of him. He had been reduced to a caricature and a punchline, and getting to meet him and look at the footage and, hear about what was happening on the ground, my conception changed, and I saw him.
So what stood out to you?
Well, I think, there was this one moment where, I saw Anthony, I saw this footage of Anthony. He was campaigning out in Far Rockaway on the beach and walking along, and he has his crew with him, and he's wearing his tie, and his pants are rolled up, and it's really hot and really sweaty, and he is going to people who are, on the beach wearing their, Speedos and bikinis and talking to them about issues. And he's just like not stopping until he connects with them and understands them. And he's going from one to the next. And I saw the way that they were just viscerally connecting with him. And I saw how much he cared about the issues. And so, I thought this guy's so much more than I had previously thought.
So, Josh, remind us, how far into the mayoral race did you get before the new scandal broke?
Yeah, so it was about halfway through. So I think it was about 6 weeks in, and I think as listeners maybe know, he, for those first 6 weeks, he was really, defying expectations in a way that was kind of certainly shocking the political establishment, and a lot of pundits and commentators were really stunned. They were like, wow, New Yorkers.
This is the mayoral race that in 2013 that eventually brought Bill de Blasio to become mayor, although early in the race, Bill de Blasio was pretty far down. I don't think I'd heard of Bill de Blasio at that point.
Yeah, I think de Blasio was polling, I think, back of the pack or close to it. There were a couple.
There was a point in the summer of 2013 where I had more Twitter followers than Bill de Blasio did. I remember checking that.
That's very funny. Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting race because when Anthony entered it, the dynamic really shifted in a pretty profound way, and this, avalanche of attention landed on Anthony. This incredible, media storm just like immediately erupted, and it was I mean, even from the very beginning, before the scandal resurfaced, as filmmakers, we knew we were in a pretty special place to be able to be documenting this story, which we thought was sort of shaping up to be one of the more remarkable comeback stories that maybe we'd seen in American politics, because he very quickly rose in the polls and was leading the polls right before the scandal revelations came out and everything turned into a different direction.
So one of the more remarkable figures in this film is Anthony Weiner's wife, Huma Abedin, who most people know as a close consultant to Hillary Clinton. She's not in the film nearly as much as Anthony Weiner is, yet every time she's on screen, she's a kind of mesmerizing figure to watch. If I'm not mistaken, the first scene in the film that she's in is a scene where they're at home kind of looking after their kid, and she, the look on her face doesn't seem particularly thrilled about being filmed. Can you describe what your interactions were with her?
Well, yeah, I mean, I didn't know her much beyond the campaign. So most of my interactions with her were through the course of filming. They were on board with having this story told. And I think, a lot of people ask why Anthony, and Huma, would have agreed to let a camera in. And I think it's a good question, and it's not one that we necessarily know the answer to, but it is one that, as you've seen the film, we actually ask in the film itself. And, Anthony touches on an answer where he talks about wanting a different version of his story told than the one that played out in the headlines and in the on cable news. One that's more nuanced and complex than just the punchline that he became. And I think that something is a similar, we don't really know exactly, but I think it's a similar sort of rationale for Huma's choice as well.
I think that, while Huma is more obviously quiet and reserved than Anthony, I do think that, as Josh was saying, I do think that she shared some of Anthony's desire of wanting a more fair and complete story told. I mean, you can see in the film the way in which there's a lot of judgment placed on her for making the decision to stay in the marriage. Yeah. And, I think with this film, one of the things we're trying to do is to go beyond those judgments, to show those judgments and then question them and go beyond them. And why should a woman be judged by making, decisions for her flawed husband? Those. So I think those are the kinds of questions we're hoping to raise, and we're excited for. And it seemed to be responding with audience members.
Josh, describe for me, what was your experience the day the new scandal broke during the mayoral campaign?
Yeah. So as I was saying, things were going very well, and then these new revelations came out. A woman came forward with more material that had been exchanged with Anthony. And I was filming in the office with Anthony and Huma and his staff as they were trying to figure out sort of how to manage the fallout of this story, which was just breaking in that moment. And it was obviously a really, intense place to be. And at one point, and you see this in the film, Anthony sort of asks his staff to leave, but not me. So I end up just staying in the room and filming as Anthony and Huma are sort of mulling over what's happening here. And it was a really, it's a funny experience as a filmmaker. On one hand, of course, I'm a human being. I know these people. I'm connected to what's happening. It's a very emotional moment. But on the other hand, I also am filming and have this job to do. And so there's a kind of remove that happens where, I'm focused on the camera and capturing, as much as I can. But, there certainly was a sense of, the thought certainly ran through my head of, I can't believe I'm here right now. We see celebrity meltdowns and, political scandals happen all the time, but it's so rare to actually be literally in the room while it's happening. So it's pretty interesting.
Here's a clip from the film. After the scandal breaks, Anthony Weiner does a phone interview with a tabloid reporter.
I did some very regrettable things over an extended period of time with more than one person. Very, very regrettable things that I have apologized for, and I'm going to be spending a lot of time, I think, on the campaign trail apologizing for.
Okay.
Over.
What are you hiding today?
I'm having conversations on the telephone. What do you mean hiding, Andrea?
We'll hear more from Josh Kriegman and Elise Steinberg in a minute, but first, a word from our sponsor.
Pure Nonfiction is brought to you by AMC Network's Sundance Now Club. Look out for Take 5, Justice in America, a collection of 5-minute documentaries commissioned by Sundance Now Club. Each film looks at a hot-button issue of social justice, including voting rights, gentrification, and gun violence, documented by leading filmmakers. Timely for election season, watch these films for free. Go to take5.doclub.com.
Elise, as this starts spinning into a crisis control, what impact did that have on the filmmaking process?
Our intention with this film was to take someone like Anthony and Huma, who had just been reduced to caricatures and punchlines, and to spend time with them and to show a more complex, nuanced portrait. And that intention, which was what we set off to do in the beginning. I mean, I think I've talked about this before. It's been said that those that are the most exposed are the least understood. And I think that certainly was the case with Anthony. So that was our intention. And then that intention only intensified when the scandal broke. You just saw a version being played out on cable news that was very different than what we saw privately. And so from a filmmaker perspective, what we wanted to do is really highlight that difference and show. And I think, there are some moments where we played with it. I think there's a scene with Lawrence O'Donnell and Anthony, and you see Anthony and Lawrence O'Donnell having an argument on television. And then you see from our side angle, Anthony is alone in a room, shouting. And there's a different story there to be told. And so we wanted to play with that.
He's alone in a room shouting because he's actually not in the same studio as Lawrence O'Donnell. He's in a different studio.
That's right. So it just tells a different story. So there are two stories being told. The headline version that you see, and then beyond the headlines. And as Josh was saying, we see these scandals and these meltdowns play out all the time. But what does it mean to be in the room? What is it like for people really at the center of a media firestorm? What's that? What does that feel like?
So one thing that's so fascinating in this film is that it's not only Anthony and Huma's story. There are other people who are part of this, including people on his campaign staff who have signed on to be supportive of him. What were your interactions like with the rest of the campaign?
Well, at a certain point, I became embedded in the campaign. I was the film. The filmmaking schedule was show up as early as possible and stay as late as possible. Right. That's every day. Right. That was the shoot schedule. And so obviously everyone understood that I was wanting to capture as much of the story as I could for our documentary, and so I became kind of I was embedded in the campaign. I was there for much of what was going on, and it was it was a very friendly sort of relationship with everybody as we were all just going through what, if you've ever been involved in campaigns, I mean, they're obviously very hectic and intense environments, even without a worldwide scandal unfolding. So I was right there in the middle of it all with everybody.
So, Elise, one of the other characters who's swept up into this is a woman who is an accuser of Anthony Weiner, and on election night, your film crew is following her. She's got a lot of other media attention who feels like they're kind of goading her along. I don't know if she needed that much goading, but she's acting as a kind of gadfly to him, trying to get into his media space on election night, which causes a bunch of stress for everyone. What was your interactions with her?
So on election night, Josh and I, we knew this is an important day in the story, and we wanted to have as many camera people as we had. We had, as I said, Sean McGing.
Make sure your memory cards are free, right?
Memory cards are free. A guy named Daniel Carter. But we had no idea what would happen. I mean, it was, we were just at, I think, outside where Anthony was going to give his concession speech, and then, of course, his sexting partner, Sydney Leather, showed up, and we were just, filming her along with a lot of other camera news outlets that were following her story. I think a decision was made to really.
So, as I say, you didn't really have a close.
I was going to say,
contact with her.
Just filming her.
There was a pack of cameras.
Exactly.
You're among them.
And we wanted to film her and also film the media following her, since that was also part of the story. But for us, it really was through Anthony's perspective. That was what we decided to tell his story, to be with him and experience this election from his perspective. So that was our, we didn't really go beyond that with her. So
Election Day is over. Now you're sitting on this footage. You're Josh, you're a first-time filmmaker. At least you've got some more experience, but it's a pretty heady story to be sitting on as relatively new filmmakers. What did you do to pull it together?
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge that is very familiar to, I think, all documentarians, is having this massive amount of footage and trying to figure out how to work through it. And, we basically we watched it all and got a sense of what we had. I mean, we had the benefit of having a natural narrative, of course, the campaign to kind of, form the backbone of the story. And then, of course, just sifting through for the moments that sort of brought it together. But we just worked through it and figured it out. We also brought together a team that could help us do it. We had eventually an amazing editor, Eli Dupre, who came on board and really became a crucial part of the creative process. And we also had an executive producing team with Julie Goldman and Chris Clements and Carolyn Hepburn, who are part of the Motto team, who helped us kind of figure things out and work through the creative process along the way.
So what were the toughest things, Elise, in the edit room and that post-production process to manage?
Good question. I think that one thing that comes to mind was just we had a lot of material to go through, and that takes a lot of time. So I think just spending the time to screen footage and transcribe it, and then just getting a handle on that material and finding an organizational system. And we also, in addition, had our...
How much material are we talking
400 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was just our footage. Of course, there was basically unlimited amount of archival footage and news footage that was out there.
Yeah.
Right?
So just, knowing what happened on a day. And so we had our co-producer, actually, Liz Warren, and Sean McGing, our assistant editor as well. Everybody was looking at material and recording it. And then, so I think that process of sifting through the material, trying to find the best moments, that took a while. And so I think that was one of the bigger challenges in terms of just dealing with the material. And then, I think another challenge was just sticking with it.
Josh, what conversations did you have with Anthony after the election? I mean, did he ever ask, so is this film really going to happen, or was there a conversation like that?
Yeah, I mean, we had a series of conversations where I kept him updated on sort of how things were going generally. We also sat down with him about 3 months after the end of the election and did what ended up being the only real sit-down interview in the film. So that's important to understand. So that sit-down interview, it starts at the very beginning of the film. He's sitting down and he's saying to the camera, I can't believe, he's kind of saying to himself, I can't believe I'm doing this interview about my sexting scandal. Yeah, we're doing a documentary about my scandal, exactly. But yeah, that was a few months after the end of the election, which was, I think, it ended up being, I think, a good timing in some ways, because, he wasn't quite as, raw from the election having just ended. There's some time that he had to reflect.
But it's fascinating to me that 3 months later, that Anthony Weiner, wouldn't have an impulse to say, like, this was a terrible time of my life. Like, I don't want to have anything to do with this film anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, and I don't know that we know. Again, I don't know that we know exactly, the rationale, except what he actually does say in the film. I mean, I think especially after the election, after he had experienced how it had all gone, in some ways, that impulse or that motivation to have a more human version of his story told was even more pronounced after it was all over, because he had, because of the way it went. I mean, as I think maybe he thought it might at the beginning, the scandal came back and overshadowed everything, and he was again reduced to this punchline. And I think that he knew, in the course of a more, fulsome version of events that we would tell in the course of a 90-minute documentary, that there might be a chance to get, to have a more human, complex, nuanced portrait, which I think actually ultimately, is true for a lot of viewers. I think a lot of viewers leave the film with a sense of him being a much more, dynamic and in some ways maybe even sympathetic person than walking into the film.
Lise, as we wrap up here, what are you hoping that viewers come away with from this film?
I mean, I think that one of the things that I'm excited about, that I do see our film resonating, and is that, yes, it's about Anthony and a campaign, but I think it's also about more than that. It provides a look at our politics today and how it's driven by entertainment and an appetite for spectacle. And we don't have to look very far to see that being played out in our current presidential race with Donald Trump. I think, while I think Anthony and Trump are very different politically and personally, I do think that they both understood that in order to have a voice in today's 24-hour news cycle, you need to put on a show. So I think, and I hope that our film can be relevant to the conversation we're having about how our politics and media function.
I want to thank Josh Kriegman and Elise Steinberg. Their film Weiner rolls out in theaters this spring. Thanks to the Pure Nonfiction team, series producer Michael Scotti Jr., coordinating producer Rachel Fishman-Feddersen, and executive producer Rafaela Neyhausen. I'm Tom Powers. If you like what you've heard, the best way to support us is to subscribe on iTunes and leave a review, even a short one. You can read our show notes, learn about live events, and sign up for our newsletter at purenonfiction.net.